So let's talk about the IOCE principles. This is the International Organization on Computer Evidence. They say we've got to have a couple of simple rules. There's actually 4 in here. Some organizations, when they list out the general rules or the general guidance, they say that there are 5 principles, but I believe there's about 4, and I'll explain why when we get to the end of this. So here's the first rule. Don't change the evidence. So when you seize it, don't change it. You say, well, Dean, that's easy. I'll just pull the hard drive out and everything will be just fine. What happens if it's a phone? What happens if it's a running computer with a RAM in it? Are you paying close attention to that and saying, wait a minute, how do I not change the running system and still pull the evidence off of it? Next one down, when it's necessary for a person to access the original digital evidence, they should be trained suitably. They shouldn't ever be using the original evidence. We should follow principle number 1. Any kind of activity for seizure, access, storage, or transfer of digital evidence must be fully documented to be preserved and available for review. That is your chain of custody. Now, chain of custody is a U.S. term that's drifted out into other countries. They may call it something different. They may have a different way to describe that. But they're saying anything that you do to the evidence, record. Even if it's a copy of the evidence, record. But maintain that original evidence so that we can use it in any court proceedings. Last real principle. Individuals is responsible for all actions. In other words, if you touch it, it's kind of like if you break it, you buy it, you're in charge of this evidence. You can't say, hey, I'm not in charge. You're the responsible party at that point. So there's 4 things. Where's the 5th one come in? The 5th one is everybody is responsible for following these principles. It's pretty straightforward. We're going to dig a little deeper into the next set of principles that aren't international in basis but are being followed and echoed out into the international body. So you need to know these principles. You need to own them. Not from I've got to memorize this for the test standpoint. You've got to look at this and say, okay, all forensics examiners follow these principles. So it's kind of like your laws, your rules. It's the first thing that you do when you think about forensics. And here's the link to it. I'm sorry it's a really long, ugly link, but you can type in ioce.org, not .net, that's a different thing, and type in exam digital, and it'll tell you exactly what's going on. Now, here's the other one that is more U.S.-centric, but they've come up with a couple of principles that are internationally accepted. I said, everybody goes, oh yeah, that's good. So there may be another scientific working group on digital evidence that they call it something different, but they follow these same principles. So we all kind of follow this. And so what are we supposed to do as far as a scientific work group is considered? Well, they have a mission. And it says, in the field of digital evidence, we're all going to agree on a certain body of principles, and let's look at those principles. This comes from the FBI.gov. It's an odd place to find it, but it's a nice, easy way to get a hold of it. You type in FBI.gov for the U.S., sorry, international citizens, and type in forensics, science, communication, and then these will pop up. Now, what they talk about here is SOPs, Standard Operating Procedures. This sets a level of quality and control for all case management, all case records, and it's accepted for your equipment, for your procedures, and your materials. In other words, create a checklist that everybody else can understand and that you follow all the time. Now, that checklist is just going to keep you in the general area of things. It's not going to be very specific to that particular case, so you still have to be that sleuthing person, that person who wants to investigate and figure out what happened in this puzzle. So it's not a rote script, but it says, okay, when we do this, this is how we do it. So let's take a look. This is principle number 1. In order to ensure that digital evidence is collected, preserved, examined, and transferred in a manner safeguarding the accuracy and reliability, because we're sending it to court, of the evidence, Law enforcement and forensics organizations must establish and maintain an effective quality system. Now, previously I talked about NIST. That's the National Institute of Science and Technology for the U.S. In that NIST set of documents, if you actually go there and you type in NIST and forensics, they actually have a testing lab that says, here are the ways that we deal with the evidence when we collect it and preserve it. Criteria 1.1, I'm sorry that they got the digits up there, but I mean that's the way these are laid out. All agencies that seize and examine digital evidence must maintain appropriate standard operating procedure document. Okay, we do it this way and we follow it. It's just like in the U.S. when we arrest somebody, we say this is the Miranda rights. You know, we say, okay, we're going to read you your rights off this card. Even though I've memorized them by heart and I've heard them on TV, I'm going to read them off of this card. And that's the way we do it, because then you know that, hey, I pulled out my Miranda card and I read every single thing on it. Hey, I pulled out my search and seizure document and I did everything on it. I pulled a search and seizure, a warrant from the templates that come from the Department of Justice, and I just followed that right down the line, and then I filled in the parts where, oh, it's this kind of computer at this location and under this scope. So anybody that is doing this is going to have a standard operating procedure, and they're going to follow it. 1.2, agencies management must review the standard operating procedures on an annual basis. In other words, things change, so get up to date. 1.3, procedures used must generally accepted in the field or supported by data gathering or recorded in a scientific manner. Go back to that experimentation that we talked about, where we set up our own operating system and we replicated what we actually saw within the evidence. Remember, the evidence isn't a running system. It's an image of the system, and it's an artifact that's left behind. It's the copy of the registry that's there. How did this registry key get in there, and how did it get set to this value? I have to be able to scientifically say, okay, I set up another computer that looks exactly like it, and I produced these results. It was a clean registry, it wasn't there, and now when I did these activities, it was a dirty registry, and this value was populated. That value is the same as this value. You've got to match those up. That's the scientific way to do it. 1.4, agencies must maintain written copies of appropriate technical procedures. So again, just like the Miranda, just because you know the Miranda doesn't mean that you still shouldn't pick up that file and use it, that folder or that document. One of the things that I've seen forensics experts do in the field is they have a field manual, and in that field manual they have clear slip-in sheets for their procedures, and they've got them all tagged out, and then they open it up to that clear piece of the procedure and they pull out this thing. It's a red marker. It's like they call them China markers, and they have boxes on the sheet, and the sheet's inside the laminated plastic, and what they do is they check them off as they go. I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. And then when they're finished, they actually take a picture of it and say, on this date, I did these things, and here's my procedure, and I followed it. So if anybody questions their integrity or the way they did something, they can say in the court of law, no, this is my binder, that is my template, and as I did these activities, I checked each one of them off. 1.5, agencies must use hardware and software that is appropriate and effective for procedure and examination procedure. Hardware and software. We'll talk a lot more about this later on, but the software must be approved in most cases, or you need to be able to prove that the software is consistent. For the young examiner that's out there, a forensics investigator that's out there, use the approved NIST software. Don't try and prove your stuff out. First, know your process well, and then start reaching out. Oh, I need a script to do this. Oh, I need to do this. This procedure is proven by NIST, or I can go ahead and process it through NIST if I need to. 1.6. All activities relating to the seizure, storage, examination, or transfer of digital evidence must be recorded in writing. This is documentation as you go along. 1.7. Any actions that has a potential to alter, damage, or destroy the aspect of the original evidence must be performed by qualified persons in a forensically sound manner. This goes back to the IOCE's way of doing things. In other words, be trained for the purpose. Now, here's a key indicator on this, and we're going to talk about FTK and NCASE in a little bit. Here's a key element. If you know how to use the tool, you have to be able to prove that. So what you should be doing is going to an NCASE class, getting the NCASE certificate of completion or the certification that goes along with it. that certificate of completion you should be putting in your file so that when somebody says, well, how do you know how to use the EnCase tool? You might have just been clicking buttons randomly. You can pull out the certificate and say, no, on this date I went to a class, or on these days I do continuing education with EnCase. And you communicate that to them. That's the standards and criteria that we need to pay attention to prepare ourselves to collect digital evidence.